We are on May 7th, 1824. That evening, the Viennese crowd into one of the city's most prestigious concert halls. It is here that Ludwig van Beethoven is to present his brand new symphony.
For the very last time, this man appears in public for an exceptional occasion, the creation of a grand work, the Ninth Symphony.
There are many people attending the concert. Beethoven is obviously very well known. He is one of the major composers in Vienna at that time. A very impressive symphony is announced.
The Ninth Symphony begins like a sort of volcanic eruption that is preparing. And then suddenly, the theme explodes. Quickly, people realize that Beethoven is unable to truly conduct the orchestra.
At that time, it must be remembered, Beethoven had become completely deaf since 1820. He had been in total darkness in terms of hearing for the past 4 years.
So he was cautious. He has a principal conductor named Umlauf, and Beethoven stands next to him. In fact, he doesn't really conduct, he only turns the pages.
This is something quite unusual for a composer. It is a composer who doesn't hear his own work.
And then there is the climax with this famous Ode to Joy that concludes the work.
It's the first time that a vocal part is included into a symphony to make it a masterpiece.
It was the text of An die Freude, Ode to Joy, composed by Schiller, which was a very well-known text at the time. Beethoven reorganized it to emphasize joy, this beautiful divine spark.
It's a message of hope, of universal peace for humanity. And no doubt it must have touched more than one heart at that time.
The concert is a triumph. People are in tears. They are very moved to have heard this totally extraordinary thing, which is completely unprecedented.
The audience applauds wildly at the end, but Beethoven hears nothing. That's what's absolutely dramatic. He couldn't even hear the crackling of the applause.
The crowd applauds a second time, the orchestra stands up, bows a third time, and it's at the fourth time that Unga, the mezzo-soprano, stands up. With tears in her eyes, she goes to the podium and takes Beethoven's hand to make him turn around, and when he sees the audience standing, he leans forward to bow. I think it's a magnificent moment.
Beethoven is 53 years old when he presents this final symphony. Already in his lifetime, he is recognized as one of the most talented composers of his era. But 2 centuries later, why do these works still place him among the geniuses of music?
In the history of music, Beethoven is a genius beyond the norms. That is to say, he's in a class of his own. He belongs with Mozart, Tchaikovsky, Vivaldi, Berlioz. He is one of the giants in the history of music.
Each work of Beethoven is like a small white stone in the edifice of classical music. Such hits! These piano pieces, Für Elise, the Moonlight Sonata, the Appassionata, of course, the quartets, quite incredible, and then the symphonies.
The third, the Eroica, the sixth, the Pastoral. The seventh, with that second movement that brings tears to your eyes. It's such a sumptuousness with that kind of huge crescendo of the strings like that. It's of incredible beauty.
What is interesting in Beethoven's work is that it is both very epic and spectacular, and at the same time very intimate.
3 words, in my opinion, characterize Beethoven's compositions. They are emotion, power, and drama.
You give that man a few notes, 3 chords, and he composes for you just like that in front of you. A sort of symphony or a sonata. It's extraordinary.
I believe that if today we ask someone on the street to talk about Beethoven and name a work, I think immediately it would be the opening of the Fifth Symphony that comes to mind. Just hearing those first measures, pa-pa-pa-pum. It must be said, this theme that is poor in itself if you state it slowly, pom, 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 pom. An intrinsically distressing poverty, but Beethoven completely transforms it. That is to say, from this theme, he weaves it like a series of variations, in augmentation, in retrograde. As a result, this theme constantly wanders.
And it's incredible. And this work is universally known. And that's what makes this Fifth Symphony perhaps the first hit song of humanity.
If his music is universally famous, what do we know about the man? Starting with his appearance. About 20 portraits were made during his lifetime, but one of them forever immortalizes the face associated with the composer. This precious painting is now kept in Bonn, in his birthplace.
Here we see the most well-known painting of Beethoven, painted by Joseph Karl Stieler in 1820. It shows a certain myth we have in mind. It has become the very image of the composer. The pose we see is very well known in the Christian West. All the evangelists of the Middle Ages are painted like that. The manuscript, the pen, and the gaze towards the sky. From where the inspiration comes, the message from God, the genius, you know. So we immediately see he was a very important figure. The appearance is very close, I think, to the original appearance, I would say. In the 1820s, Beethoven always had somewhat wild hair, not very well groomed, so I think it looks a lot like him.
He is not what you would call an Apollo, to say the least. He looks like a bear. He seems a bit grumpy, aggressive, even from his youth.
He is a relatively short man. He is 1.62 meters tall.
He is hunched, fat, stocky, short-legged.
He has a strong head with a jaw that juts out just a little. Then this large forehead. It feels like all the inspiration in the world is behind this forehead.
He is very dark-haired, with a relatively tanned complexion. In fact, some nickname him the Spaniard. That gives you an idea. He has a somewhat Spanish side.
He has a face apparently marked by smallpox he had as a child.
On the other hand, he has elements that are appealing. We know he has fabulous white teeth.
He has a small dimple on his chin that is very beautiful. And then that gaze, when he looks at you, it goes inside you.
I think it must be chilling to be face to face with a Beethoven and to be looked straight in the eyes by a Beethoven.
He has a very intense gaze and genuine charisma.
He was someone you had to see. Someone whose animation, whose inner fire made all the beauty.
An extraordinary talent and presence that would make Ludwig van Beethoven one of the most charismatic personalities of his time. It was in Bonn, in present-day Germany, that Ludwig van Beethoven was born in December 1770. While the month and year are known, the exact date of his birth remains a mystery. The only certainty is his baptism, of which St. Remigius Church holds a precious record.
This object is the witness of the first appearance of young Beethoven. Beethoven is baptized on December 17th, 1770. We cannot know his date of birth because there are no birth records, meaning we only have the baptism date. At that time, infant mortality was enormous, and baptisms were done very early, directly after birth. If the baby was born in the morning, he was baptized the same day. If he was born in the evening, he was baptized the next day. And we can conclude that Beethoven was born on the 16th or 17th, depending on the time of birth.
The arrival of this child is a happy event for Johann and Maria Magdalena, his parents. After the premature loss of a newborn 1 year earlier, Ludwig is the couple's first child to survive.
It should be noted that of the children born to his parents, 7 in total, only 3 survived, which is, I would say, unfortunately normal at this time when infant mortality was generally over 50%.
The young Ludwig grows up in this rather modest house located in the heart of the city of Bonn. His father Johann is a musician at the court, just like his grandfather who settled in this principality at the beginning of the 18th century.
The Beethovens, as their name indicates, since it's Ludwig van Beethoven, not von, are of Flemish origin.
Beethoven actually means beetroot's field.
The grandfather comes to seek fortune in Germany. He arrives in Bonn to become a choir master at the court.
So, he is a musician, he is a composer, and he is responsible for all the musical celebrations, whether for the church or, of course, for the court. And that was very important.
It is therefore a rare and prestigious position that Ludwig's talented grandfather attains, with a court of wealthy princes settled in Bonn.
The city of Bonn is a city of 10,000 inhabitants, but it was already significant at the time. Now it is a large town.
It is a city on the banks of the Rhine, meaning it is a commercial city with a lot of traffic. And above all, it is a city that is the residence of the Prince-Electors of Cologne. That is to say, Prince-Electors are those who elect the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire.
This principality is in the 18th century, a member of the Holy Roman Empire, a vast territory composed of many small states that cover an area close to modern Germany and Austria.
Let's understand that the prince-electors are therefore heads of state. They lead a true principality, and at the same time, they are patrons. They are passionate about art. Bonn, since the beginning of the 18th century, has truly become a small artistic capital.
The most beautiful example of this great artistic sensitivity is located in Brühl, a few kilometers from Bonn. The Augustusburg Castle was built in the mid-18th century and certainly became one of the most splendid work settings for Ludwig's grandfather.
When the visitor of the Prince-Elector enters Augustusburg Castle, the first thing they see is the magnificent Grand Staircase of Honor, a masterpiece of German Rococo, richly decorated with marble columns and sculptures and paintings. For example, the frescoes are by Carlo Carlone. You see in the middle the golden bust of the Elector Prince Clemens August of Cologne, who had this castle built as a summer residence where he could display all the splendor, show all his wealth, all his fortune, all his power. We are here in the ballroom and reception hall of the castle. This is the room where the Prince-Elector hosts official dinners. These official dinners at the time are accompanied by music, so the musicians and the choir find their place on the gallery. Music is omnipresent at the court of the Prince-Electors, for masked balls, for tragedies, operas, comedies, thus for entertainment. Therefore, the prince-electors are particularly attentive to musicians. Beethoven's grandfather, Ludwig van Beethoven the Elder, is chosen as the choir master thanks to his great talent.
This grandfather was a notable figure, and he was a notable figure who also had an understanding of music.
It should be known that Beethoven kept his grandfather's portrait near him until he died. He revered it.
Alas, Ludwig is only 3 years old when his illustrious grandfather, who could have taken charge of his musical education, passes away.
It is therefore the father who took him in hand.
Johann van Beethoven is the caricature of what one might call a failure. He is someone who is very frustrated in life and, as can happen in such circumstances, wants to live vicariously through his children, especially through little Ludwig, who seems to have a genuine talent from a very young age. This kid is gifted. You can see it. You can feel it right away.
He thought to himself, if I had a child prodigy like Mozart, then I could earn a living. Plus, it's flattering. I am Beethoven, and I have a son who is brilliant.
Immediately, the idea occurs to him to undertake, with his son, great European tours, like Mozart did.
It is then on the 26th of March, 1778, that Ludwig's father decides to organize his first concert.
It was a concert given in Cologne, where, by the way, to make a good impression, Ludwig's father presents his son as a 6-year-old child, quite simply.
He claims that Ludwig was born in 1772 and not in 1770. Because obviously the younger a child prodigy is, the more prodigious it is. Now in the city of Bonn, people hear that there is a little fellow who plays the piano, so he has started to prove himself.
And this first concert still brought little Beethoven some notoriety. People realize that he has a lot of potential and that he must be given an education that matches it.
To achieve this, Johann imposes on his son a particularly demanding musical training, with methods that are more than harsh.
Sometimes when Johann van Beethoven returns from the tavern, quite late with his friend named Pfeiffer, he wakes the little Ludwig up, pulls him out of the bed in the middle of the night. Can you imagine the poor little boy who was sleeping, forced to the piano? And Pfeiffer is there making him practice his scales until dawn.
Thank God, little Ludwig truly had a passion for musical art, because the way his father managed his training could have disgusted him forever.
Ludwig is not a miracle, as Leopold Mozart said about his son. Ludwig is more of a survivor.
Aware of his own limitations, Johann van Beethoven set out to find teachers to make him an accomplished musician.
This is exactly the role of this court organist, named Christian Neefe, who takes this very young man under his wing and tries to improve his playing and open new horizons for him.
He continues to play the keyboard. He also plays with another violin teacher. He plays the organ. He also plays the harpsichord in the court orchestra. It's Neefe who supports him in this and teaches him to know the great composers.
Armed with this high-level education, Ludwig quickly stands out from the other young musicians in Bonn, and it is the Elector Prince Maximilian Francis of Austria who decides to give him his chance. He signs him a letter of recommendation that will open all the doors of Vienna for him.
Beethoven is 16 years old when he discovers the musical capital of the world.
Vienna is a city where everything important in musical life comes together and is known. It is a city where musical life is extremely rich. And that's where Mozart also lives.
Meeting Mozart for Beethoven was like meeting the Holy Grail, or the Pope. He was a genius that everyone knew.
It's like today, I don't know, a young person who wants to meet a rock star and can't sleep at night.
In 1787, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is 31 years old. At that time, He is recognized as one of the greatest composers, a talent celebrated to this day.
We are in the Burggarten, one of the most beautiful parks in the center of Vienna. It is located behind the Hofburg, that is to say, the royal palace. Behind me, the statue of Mozart stands over the city behind his podium. The cherubs at his feet play music. It depicts the different instruments, his work also crowned with laurels, and below, a depiction of a scene from one of Mozart's most famous operas, Don Giovanni. Mozart is brilliant, he composes very quickly, he is extremely productive. By the time he is 35 years old, he has already produced 400 works. They decided to send Beethoven to meet Mozart in the hope that he would continue the musical revolution that Mozart had started and show the same talent. Beethoven was very aware of his abilities, but obviously meeting Mozart meant meeting his model, the composer in Europe who could give him a true opinion on his music.
A much-anticipated meeting that becomes one of the greatest mysteries of Beethoven's youth.
Did Ludwig meet Amadeus? Did Beethoven meet Mozart? It's very difficult to say, we don't have absolute proof, but it's very likely.
Can you imagine it's the meeting of the entire history of music?
We have 4 sources confirming that it indeed took place. As for knowing exactly what happened, we only have a few indications.
Beethoven arrives. Mozart is not alone. He's surrounded by friends. He's already very tired, for he knows the price of being a child prodigy since he was 1. He's met a lot of said-so child prodigy.
And Beethoven first, it seems, plays him a piece from his imagination, which Mozart, having taken it for a memorized piece, finds a bit academic.
And here is why Beethoven is a genius. When he sees it's not working, he says, "I will play you something else." He doesn't want to leave. He stays and starts to improvise, putting his whole soul into it.
And there, all of a sudden, Mozart detects something. And he reportedly said to the people gathered at his place, "Pay close attention to this little one. He will undoubtedly make a name for himself in the world."
This meeting, if it indeed took place, did not lead to any collaboration between the two geniuses. For a tragic event suddenly interrupts the young Beethoven's stay in Vienna.
He must return quickly to Bonn because he learns that his mother is dying.
He arrives just in time to see her die. It is a terrible blow because she was the only one to give him the tenderness he will feel so lacking afterward.
The loss of his mother is huge loss for him because he becomes the head of the family, in a way, since his alcoholic father is not capable of taking care of his brothers. So, his status changes.
And of course, for him, music is just a way to earn money and support his family.
It is 5 years later, in this hall, that Beethoven's destiny finally changes. We are in the year 1792. The musician is playing in the orchestra of a ball given by the Elector Prince. But that evening, a great master of music is in the audience. It is the Austrian Joseph Haydn.
Joseph Haydn, at that moment, is the greatest composer in the world. No more, no less. For a long time, his works have been spread throughout Europe, but he is at the peak, at the height of his glory.
They made him listen to a cantata by Beethoven, and he tells his Elector Prince that Beethoven is truly a talent that must be nurtured.
And so, the young Beethoven is entrusted. It is Maximilian Franz, who is at that time the Prince Elector, the Prince Archbishop of Bonn, who entrusts the young Beethoven to Haydn. One cannot imagine a greater master.
Beethoven is 21 years old when he leaves his hometown once again to study under the great master in Vienna. Full of hope and ambition, he hopes to complete his training there to become like his grandfather, a choirmaster in Bonn. Before leaving, he receives an exceptional document that shows the admiration of his friends and patrons.
Here is a guest book, as was commonly made at the time for important figures, where each person in their circle of friends would add a small note, a dedication with an encouraging thought. This golden book contains 15 dedications, and there is especially Count Waldstein, who is an advisor to the Prince Elector, and who has a premonition, a foresight of Beethoven's fabulous destiny. Here is essentially the translation of what Count Waldstein says. "My dear Beethoven, you are going to Vienna to fulfill a long-expressed wish." Mozart's genius is in mourning. In the inexhaustible Haydn, he finds a refuge, but not an occupation. So I beg you, through incessant application, receive from Haydn's hands the spirit of Mozart. He therefore understood very well that Beethoven would be a genius, and that he would join precisely in the firmament of the great masters of music history, his two predecessors.
If we know his great talents as a composer, Beethoven is also a great seducer, as evidenced by his love correspondence. Among these letters, there is one that intrigues and fascinates more than the others, the letter to the immortal beloved, a moving document found among his papers after his death, and which remains an enigma even today.
It is a text in which all of Beethoven's feelings come through, a little like through his music, but this time he writes it, and one feels a sense of love of infinite power. Beethoven writes it to a woman he has loved for a long time, as we discover by reading it. A woman with whom he is very intimate and who is certainly very young, since he addresses her informally. This is quite rare. A woman who is not free, who is certainly married. We discover all this in this letter.
My angel, my all, myself. Can our love survive in any way other than through sacrifices? Without demanding everything, can you change the fact that you are not entirely mine and I am not entirely yours? Farewell. Contemplate the beautiful nature and calm your mind about what must be. Love demands everything, and rightly so. Thus it is with me and you with me.
We don't even know if this document was sent. Was it just a draft? Did Beethoven then copy it out neatly?
He kept that to himself. It was a boiling in Beethoven's heart. A sort of burst of, not madness, but rather exultation.
He thinks that maybe he was too lyrical, too excessive. And when he reread his letter, he might have felt ashamed. He thought it was too much. He thought that, in any case, this love would not come to fruition.
An impossible love with an unknown woman, whom Beethoven simply calls my immortal beloved. But who is she? A mystery difficult to solve, as Beethoven's conquests were numerous from his arrival in Vienna in the early 1790s.
Imagine what a Viennese salon might be like in 1793. People are very accustomed to all the concert performers, and when these fine ladies see this somewhat awkward young man arrive, I think they quickly hide behind their fans and do not attach much importance to him. And then he starts to play, and then he starts to improvise with this incredible passion, with this fire that suddenly spreads through the salon. The murmurs fall silent. People gather around the prodigy. This man makes you touch the heavens, makes you touch the gods. He is the music.
Beethoven also stands out from other musicians of his time, thanks to the emotions he conveys through his music. In 1801, he composes one of the most emblematic works of the repertoire that opens the door to Romanticism.
What was extraordinary in the Moonlight Sonata is the diversity of feelings that Beethoven manages to express. In this first movement of the sonata, we see something seemingly simple, a pattern with a triplet of notes.
With this simple formula, he sets this color, this anticipation. It was said to be somewhat depressive. But further on, the sonata transforms into a kind of storm of inner turmoil. It's no longer just a piano expressing itself, but it feels like an entire orchestra. It feels like a crashing wave. There is a kind of madness expressed in this overflowing virtuosity. Romanticism in music is above all the expression of all human feelings, and especially their musical translation. And Beethoven is the first, in my opinion, through his works, to convey these famous emotions.
An accomplished musician, Beethoven becomes a true star known and recognized throughout the city of Vienna. Very quickly, many young girls from the aristocracy want to become his students.
As they heard it in the beautiful salons of Vienna, played in an extraordinary way, they asked Mother to take lessons with this somewhat extraordinary young man. And he keeps watching their delicate strokes, the pretty white hands running over the keyboards. He is madly in love with all these young girls, and he had a series of adventures.
He never needed to seek a female conquest at that time.
Some say he was a hopeless romantic. That's not it at all. It's that he is enthusiastic, and he likes musicians. He likes vitality. He likes pretty girls.
He is not a seducer at first glance, and yet he is. These young women are in love with him. We know many people with unattractive appearances who are seducers. This is the case with Beethoven. And in addition to his personality, there is his music, the charm of his sonatas, his virtuosity. He is a seducer in music.
To charm these young students, Beethoven does not hesitate to give them special attention. He dedicates a work to them.
When young girls receive dedications from Beethoven, it's a present, an extraordinary gift. It's a love letter, one could say.
But rather than receiving ordinary letters, they receive scores filled with all of Beethoven's emotions. But one can imagine that these young women are in heaven.
It was something very prestigious. It's obvious that having a dedication from Beethoven meant being chosen, because everyone knew he was a genius, that it left you like that. You passed into posterity if you had a dedication from Beethoven.
And if there is one dedication that has gone down in history, it is the famous Für Elise. But to whom does Beethoven address it?
Elise is not Elise. This letter to Elise is dedicated to Thérèse Malfatti. Thérèse Malfatti was his student. She was 19 years old while he was 40. There was quite a large age difference, but nevertheless a romantic relationship developed between them. And so, in fact, it should have been for Thérèse. But finally, when the publisher found the manuscript, 50 years after it was composed, the manuscript was in poor condition, and he read Elise instead of Thérèse. That's why this piece became the Für Elise, when it should be a Für Thérèse.
If Beethoven's talent and charisma earn him real and almost involuntary success with the women he encounters, one of them held a very special place in his love life. Her name was Josephine von Brunswick.
The Brunswicks are Hungarian aristocrats whom Beethoven meets in 1799. The family comes to Vienna in the hope of finding a husband for their daughters who are of marrying age.
The two young Countesses von Brunswick take private lessons with Beethoven, and since he finds them extremely talented and also very sensitive, he is so happy that he extends the time of his lessons with them more than he should. He no longer notices the time passing.
The Brunswick family becomes friends with Beethoven to the point of inviting him to their castle. And they create a very strong bond.
He falls in love with Josephine of Brunswick, who is an absolutely divine young woman, very elegant, very lively, with a sharp mind.
Because from the moment a creative artist like him is with an intellectually gifted woman who can fulfill him, he is beyond happiness.
She becomes the great love, not only of his youth, but probably the great love of his life. And he wants to marry her, but her mother doesn't even want to hear about it. She thinks that this Mr. Beethoven dreams beyond his means.
This is one of the great dramas of Beethoven's life. He can be close to the aristocracy, but he remains a commoner.
One does not marry Beethoven. Certainly he is a recognized, appreciated and celebrated artist, but he is someone without social standing.
He has neither name, birth, nor status, nor money, even less education. He is only a music master. So, how could he marry a young girl from the aristocracy?
Josephine is married almost by force to a count who is 30 years older than her. So it's a marriage of convenience.
And what's extraordinary is that during the years of Josephine's marriage, Beethoven somewhat waits for her. He is there in reserve, watching.
And then one day her husband dies, so Josephine is free.
And there Beethoven says to himself, "This is it, my time has come. I will finally be able to make Josephine my wife," except that her mother is still there and continues to oppose Josephine's marriage. And Beethoven ends up never marrying Josephine.
Beethoven is desperate. He sees his hopes for happiness vanish once again when, in 1810, Josephine remarries. Like cursed but inseparable lovers, they continue to write to each other and meet for many years.
It is even said that following a relationship that supposedly took place in 1812, Beethoven might have gotten Josephine pregnant.
9 months later, she will give birth to a little girl who will be named Minona. If you reverse the letters, it spells anonym, so anonymous in French. She might not be the daughter of her official father after all.
We are not certain, we will never know. But it is a way to prove that the relationship between Josephine and Beethoven lasted.
Is it to her that he addresses the famous letter to an immortal beloved? It doesn't matter. What is certain is that by writing this letter, Beethoven proves he was the greatest of all lovers.
We will probably never know the truth about this letter, but what is known is that Josephine was one of the greatest sources of inspiration for the composer.
In 1804, Beethoven composed his only opera in which he expresses the apotheosis of love. He exalts absolute fidelity. This opera is called Fidelio.
Fidelio, and the transposition of his story with Josephine. So Josephine can flatter herself in a way for having been the inspiration for Fidelio.
Eternal lover, yet always rejected. Could Beethoven bear some responsibility for his successive failures?
He often fantasized about married women, so taken women, which allowed him, I think, to have enough time to devote to his work and thus, in a way, not to commit.
He said, "If I had married, what would have been left for music?" That is to say, he always makes sure that his love stories are impossible.
Despite this perpetual quest for creation, a new young student enters the composer's life. Her name is Bettina Brentano.
Bettina was the equivalent in the Romantic era to George Sand in France, for example, with the same influence.
Bettina was a little brilliant social climber, meaning she needed all the great men. It was an obsession. Some people collect stamps. She collected geniuses.
She is a prodigy in the field of literature and maintains correspondence with the greatest men of letters, especially the greatest in Germany of the time, who is Goethe.
Beethoven has adored Goethe for a very long time. He thinks he is a great German master. So for a long time, he has wanted to meet him. But Goethe does not respond to him.
Bettina Brentano has an ambition, which is to bring together the two greatest geniuses of German artistic culture in the broad sense, Goethe and Beethoven. And she succeeded.
It is in Teplitz, in Bohemia, in what is now the Czech Republic, that the meeting takes place in July 1812. For several days, the two men meet, exchange ideas, debate, and even consider working together. But a chance encounter changes everything.
The imperial family arrives, the emperor, his wife, and their children. And Goethe, quite naturally, follows protocol. He removes his hat and bows respectfully. Beethoven, on the other hand, charges right in, and it's the sovereigns who has to step away to let him pass. And when Goethe joins him, he is absolutely outraged by Beethoven's behavior. Beethoven says to him, "You are wrong to honor them so much. They're the one who should be saluting us, not the other way around."
And he also writes to his publisher, yes, in fact, Goethe likes the courtly atmosphere too much. And this courtly aspect deeply displeases Beethoven. And on Goethe's side, he finds that Beethoven is really an untamed personality, with no limits. So much so that he no longer really wants to be in contact with Beethoven.
This long-awaited meeting was the first and the last. The two men would not see each other again and would never work together. For Beethoven, it is yet another disappointment. All his life, he suffered from his complicated relationships with his contemporaries. While Beethoven continues his career with one of the most powerful monarchies of the time, France is experiencing a true political upheaval. In 1789, young Ludwig is 18 years old when the French Revolution breaks out, and like a trail of powder, in a few years, a wind of freedom now blows across all of Europe. While the monarchies tremble, Beethoven follows these events with great enthusiasm.
Beethoven has a visceral hatred of absolutism. He cannot stand the inequality among men, the difference in classes.
He is someone who believes that talent is as valuable as a title, and that he should be able to speak as an equal with anyone.
And so France, for him, is the country of the Enlightenment. It is also the symbol of freedom, while he feels stifled in a country that is politically very controlled.
He embraced the ideals of the revolution, and he himself becomes in a way a revolutionary.
If Beethoven is above all a revolutionary in his music, he does not hesitate to display his convictions to the aristocracy. Joseph Müller reveals in 1804 in this painting a clothing style that is still far, very far from the taste of the Austrian nobility.
This portrait is fascinating because we have Beethoven dressed in what was called the French fashion. This was the expression used by the Viennese at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. So here, Beethoven is depicted with free hair and sideburns, which increasingly become an attribute, an ornament of French society. There is also, in the lower part, as we can see, the use of trousers that tuck into boots. All this is a transformation, because don't forget that we still have a Viennese population dressed in the 18th century fashion, with silk stockings, short velvet breeches, jackets, and powdered wigs. By adopting this attire, Beethoven intends to turn a page on an old world. It is a very outward way for him to show that he belongs to a society of the future.
a society of the future that can only be a dream for Beethoven at that time, because this nobility represents the main source of income for Viennese musicians.
There are private concerts in all the courts, at all the princes' places, and throughout the Viennese aristocracy.
Many aristocrats had houses large enough to host music, and they themselves played music, so they gave money for it. It was a way to show their nobility and financial capacity, their distinction, by having music and musicians at home.
At the end of the 18th century, Beethoven is at a true turning point in his career. How can this musician free himself from his burdensome aristocrats and become one of the first independent composers in history?
His ambition is to live from his music, and for that, he wants to find publishers.
We need to keep in mind one thing. At the time when Beethoven was performing, they did not have any means of sound reproduction. They did not have records or radio. So having a network of publishers in Europe to distribute your scores was something fundamental. And he understood that very well from the start.
He's a real businessman, almost a shark. He puts them in competition. He asks each one to always do more work.
Sometimes he even manages to sell the same music to several publishers. He's really clever, isn't he?
For example, he wrote to his friend Wegler in 1801, "With me, there's no more negotiating. I set the prices."
He knew that someone in Vienna would be ready to give money for him to compose and to play.
He knows he is here on earth to write music, to deliver exceptional music to the world. So he has a faith, I would even say, a total faith in his genius.
Despite his genius and success, after a few years of his career, Beethoven no longer feels at home in Vienna. He thinks that this audience does not fully appreciate the novelty of his works.
He thinks that the Viennese are too conservative, that they like sausage and beer, but when it comes to political progress, that's not it. And especially he has trouble finding concerts, and he knows that in France, music has a really important political and social role since the French Revolution.
His attraction to France intensifies even more when Beethoven hears about a young officer with an extraordinary destiny.
Seen from Vienna, the one who proudly represents the French Revolution, who exports the principles of the revolution and revolutionary law throughout Europe, is this young general who gradually took power, became consul, then first consul, then consul for life. In short, it's Napoleon Bonaparte.
This idea of a man who emerged from nowhere, of humble origin, who has had a career that exactly matches what Beethoven would wish for every man, that is, to come from afar and suddenly become the guarantor of this revolution he loves so much. I think he sees him as a providential man.
And Beethoven, in a certain way, identifies with Napoleon in his own field. He also wants to be the hero of the new era in the musical domain. So, that is very, very important.
Beethoven's idea is to be noticed by Bonaparte, for Bonaparte to choose him as his official musician. And so he does everything to create works that match the tastes of the French who emerged from the Revolution.
Beethoven starts working in 1803. He composes a masterful work, and not a minor one, Eise New Symphony, his third. And when it comes time to choose the title, Ludwig knows how to flatter his idol's ego.
Beethoven wrote to his publisher that his symphony is titled Bonaparte because he was hesitating between the title or the dedication. But now he says, well, it's called Bonaparte.
He thinks it is a tribute to a man who defends freedoms, who defends the people, who defends equality.
Except that the symphony in question is from the very beginning of the year 1804, and a few weeks later, General Bonaparte, consul, republican, revolutionary, is crowned. Not as a king by divine right, but almost. He becomes emperor.
For Beethoven, it's a huge shock. Beethoven is furious. He feels personally betrayed.
Mad with rage, he crosses out the symphony's title. He tears up the dedication with his pen and decides that from now on, he will be like the others now. He will serve only his interests instead of serving the people.
He will become a tyrant like all the others. It will become the heroic symphony. There is no more Bonaparte symphony.
The fate of this work will therefore never be French, but Austrian, especially thanks to the support of one of Beethoven's most important patrons, Prince Lobkowitz.
We are here in the Heroica Hall, in the ballroom, this magnificent Baroque palace, the Lobkowitz Palace. The ceiling is decorated with allegorical paintings. There is the art of painting, sculpture, the art of poetry, the art of gardening, geometry, geography. The Lobkowitz family was one of the few families that, at the beginning of the 19th century, still maintained a private chapel. And in this private chapel, there were singers and there were about 20 instrumentalists. And the Prince of Lobkowitz provided Beethoven with his own orchestra and purchased the exclusive rights to the Third Symphony for a few months. And it is in this palace that Beethoven played his Third Symphony, also named Heroica, for the first time.
Beethoven's work is thus saved thanks to Prince Lobkowitz. But at the same time, Napoleon I continues his conquest and dismantles the Holy Roman Empire. Beethoven watches helplessly as his former idol wreak bloody havoc on all of Europe. In 1806, as the Grand Army advances on Berlin, Beethoven is invited to his friend Prince Lichnowsky's place in Silesia, in what is now the Czech Republic.
It happens that a troops of the French army passes into Silesia and officers requisition the accommodation.
Lichnowsky, a good prince if I may say, accepts the enemy at his home, and the officers asked Beethoven to play. And Beethoven does not want to, mostly because he hates playing on command. He hates being told like that. Come on, after eating, go play your little notes. He really hates that.
The prince gets angry. Beethoven gets a little angrier. He locks himself in his room. They force Beethoven's door open. Beethoven grabs a chair, threatens to smash it over the prince's head. So, the situation escalates.
Beethoven, despite the cold, despite the snow, decides to leave the prince's castle. And he will send him this letter that has remained famous among all, which has become in a way the credo of all free artists up to our time, even today.
Prince, what you are, you owe to the accident of your birth. What I am, I owe only to myself. There have been, there are, and there will be thousands of princes. There is only one Beethoven. There he went too far.
It's a real break, and it's a very bad deal because Lichnowsky is Beethoven's patron. But Beethoven is someone who almost instinctively refuses to be a servant, to obey someone who is supposed to be socially superior. He prefers the break to obedience.
Voilà.
Jerome Bonaparte is king of Westphalia. He is looking for a choirmaster and offers Beethoven to be his choirmaster.
The role of choirmaster is the ultimate role. Recognition, job security, more than interesting income.
Beethoven is very tempted by the invitation. He writes to his friends to ask their opinion, but he thinks he has more or less already decided. He even says, "Look, they let me decide even the amount I ask for, I will get what I want." And it's a huge bluff.
In fact, Beethoven does not want to leave Vienna at all, and he does want to be a choirmaster, that's for sure, but he does not want to leave Vienna at all. So, to blackmail the Viennese who have the means, thus the music-loving Viennese aristocracy, he organizes a grand concert on December 22nd, 1808.
A marathon concert with several premieres of works, the premiere of 2 symphonies, the 6th and the 5th, several piano concertos. He plays, he conducts. It's an endless concert, actually, which lasted 4 hours, more than 4 hours.
The effect is electrifying. And there, that evening, people understand that they are losing a genius for the city of Vienna.
After that concert, he receives a letter from several aristocrats who guarantee him an income by contract.
He would receive 4,000 guilder annually. He wouldn't have to do anything at all precisely. Nothing is artistically required in this agreement. Simply, he is provided for, so he can compose as he wishes. Only one condition was noted, which is that he must have his residence in Vienna. The only condition.
One could say that Beethoven achieved a great victory. Yes, but that was without considering one thing. It's a new war with the French Empire in 1809.
On May 11th, 1809, Napoleon I is at the gates of Vienna, but the city does not surrender.
Napoleon does not hesitate. He sends the cannons and fires. Beethoven is almost in the line of fire. The assault does not last very long. On May 13th, the Viennese raise the white flag and the French enter Vienna.
For Beethoven, it was something very painful. Not only because it comes from the man who disappointed him so much, but also because the situation in Vienna is becoming critical, including the economic situation.
In 1811, the debts to Napoleon are colossal. Austria has no more income. Austria is bankrupt. It's as simple as that.
And suddenly, rampant inflation arrives. The guilder is devalued. It loses its value, economic crisis, and suddenly the pension that Beethoven receives from his generous patrons, his princes, is losing a lot of its value.
He is reduced to composing military marches. There, he is really doing it for the money.
Finally, after more than 20 years of war, hope is reborn for Beethoven in April 1814. Napoleon I is forced to leave power following a series of military defeats. The fate of Europe will now be decided in Vienna.
The Napoleonic epic had completely disrupted Europe. States were no longer within their borders. Kings were no longer on their thrones. In short, order needed to be restored. A grand diplomatic congress was organized in Vienna to try to reorganize Europe. It was the Yalta of the 19th century, the Congress of Vienna.
The Congress ends up lasting 9 months. Well, it's ball after ball, feast after feast, concert after concert. It's kind of grand aristocratic festivity under the guise of redrawing post-Napoleonic Europe.
And for the authorities of the Austrian Empire, it is of great value to them to show that they have the greatest composer in the world at that time.
Beethoven presents several of his compositions there, but his greatest success, the work that is certainly one of the most performed during his lifetime, and this against all odds, is the orchestration of a battle, the Battle of Vittoria, which celebrates Wellington's victory over Napoleon in 1813.
Wellington's victory is considered the turning point of the entire Napoleonic War, the turning point of 25 years of war, if you will, and that makes the people scream with joy.
He puts all his heart into it. He puts cannon shots. He puts the sound of grape shot. It's a grand spectacle, an unbelievable circus. It's a lot of noise. Beethoven will say in the end, lot of noise for nothing. Anyway, it remained an extraordinary success.
So, after this congress, Beethoven is exalted and becomes the most recognized composer on the planet.
It was in 1796 that the fate of Ludwig van Beethoven literally changed. He was only 25 years old when he began to feel the first symptoms of an ailment that did not yet have a name.
At first, there are these tinnitus sounds, these kinds of unexpected little noises to which he pays as little attention as possible. And then, little by little, he focuses on them, saying, "But this is not possible. I'm losing my hearing."
For a musician, tinnitus is even worse than more advanced deafness. It's unbearable because, in addition, we hear incorrectly, things that are right or may be wrong, but we no longer know.
Very quickly, other symptoms appear that Beethoven tries to conceal as best as he can.
So, he seems to start not perceiving high-pitched sounds very well, not tolerating loud noises, and having some difficulties in everyday conversations.
He is devastated. He has to hide. He no longer dares to be in society. For now, people think he is distracted, since he always says he was.
He says, I, who had a sharp hearing, I, who should have it more than anyone else, now I am starting to not hear anymore.
This idea is unbearable to him. How can he continue to live if he gradually loses his hearing?
In 1802, one of his doctors recommends that he go for a retreat of solitude and silence. He goes to the outskirts of Vienna to a village called Heiligenstadt.
And one of his friends, Ferdinand Ries, joins him and notes that Beethoven falls into a kind of state of depression because he can no longer understand very well what is being said to him.
And he writes a text that will be called the Heiligenstadt Testament. He writes it addressing his brothers, but in fact, it is addressed to all humanity, to the people who thought he was a misanthrope.
He says how much his deafness, which distances him from people, makes him appear as a misanthrope when he is only full of love for humankind, and that these bad feelings attributed to him are very unjust. He quite clearly alludes to the desire to end it all. That is, he alludes to suicide.
There is obviously a message of suffering, of extreme pain. He says, I considered suicide, but art prevented me from doing it. It's the music he has within him, and wanted to share with the rest of humanity. Fate imposed silence on him. Fate, by inflicting this painful, unbearable illness on a musician with deafness, wanted to push him to abandon music, to abandon composition. And what does he say? Well, no, I will oppose fate. I will be a composer. I will compose works. And what works?
Upon his return to Vienna, Beethoven gets back to work, more determined than ever to compose. He uses all sorts of techniques to compensate for the effects of his increasing deafness.
He composed by cutting the legs off his piano, placing the piano on the ground, and most of the time sitting on the floor to feel the vibrations of the music through the ground on his body. In a way, this is what DJs or rock singers would do today.
The anecdote goes that Beethoven used a wooden stick at one point, holding one end in his teeth and applying the other to the piano frame. This method immediately connects the frame, the sound source, to the skull bone, and thus directly stimulates the inner ear.
This technique, though inconvenient, quickly proves insufficient. Beethoven then uses a unique system created especially for him, and today the Beethoven Museum in Vienna presents a copy of it.
This instrument, which seems strange to us, obviously, in its appearance, is a forte piano with, as you can see here, a resonance box. This instrument functions like a completely traditional and classical instrument, except that the makers have created an opening in the lid, in the central part. And when the hammers strike the strings, the sound then rises into the shell, into the amplifier, and Beethoven, unable to hear the notes, at least feels the vibrations. This was of considerable help to him in the progress of his work during that period of composition.
But the ailment that afflicts him continues to progress. In 1803, only 7 years after the first symptoms appeared, Beethoven is already half-deaf.
When one loses hearing and has a large orchestra in front of them, it poses problems. So, he observes his orchestra, and then gestures. He stands on tiptoe when it's time for fortissimos, and if he wants to do pianissimos, he crouches down almost squatting. He exaggerates the gestures to be understood.
You can imagine how conducting is not very practical. And besides, what's terrible is that the directors of the theatres where Beethoven comes to conduct orchestras tell the musicians, play the score, don't pay attention to those play acting. It's terrible.
His public appearances become increasingly rare, and the news spreads in Vienna. In addition to affecting his work, Beethoven's deafness gradually isolates him from his peers.
Until now, he had managed to get by. He made his interlocutors raise their voices, but the deafness increased, and in 1812 it was no longer possible. He needed to resort to the ear trumpet.
It is at this time that Beethoven meets Melzel. This ingenious tinkerer creates amazing tools for him, the originals of which are now preserved at the Beethoven House in Bonn.
These ear trumpets are made in 1813, so acoustic trumpets already exist at the time, but Melzel makes a kind of refinement to make it work better for Beethoven. So to explain how it works, it's quite simple in principle. This container amplifies the sound, concentrates it in the middle. So you place it on the head in the ear, and then the other person speaks into it here. In the time when Beethoven lived, disabilities were not shown. Neither glasses nor ear trumpets were shown. People did not show the public that they needed help for something. There is no evidence that he used that in public. It's in discussions, maybe also with several people, but not at the theater, nor at the opera, nor at the concert.
As he gradually sinks into silence, how can Beethoven compose if he cannot hear?
You must understand that Beethoven did not hear with his ears, he heard with his brain. He was actually just transcribing onto paper what he had conceived in his mind.
He has such mastery of harmonies that he doesn't need to hear the vibrations, to hear the sounds. He hears them internally in a certain way. And I think that deafness wasn't such a great obstacle in his art.
What makes Beethoven's work so special is precisely because he had to constantly negotiate with his disability and therefore find tricks. And we know that creation arises from accidents, precisely from not following laws, from not following rules. And so he had to invent his own rules.
Beethoven continues, however, to search for a miracle cure for his deafness. Still refusing to yield to fate, he is ready to do anything to escape this curse.
He will knock on every door. He will try to meet all the doctors who are said to be able to treat hearing, using remedies that are more or less good for health, and even with completely bizarre or incredible methods.
One person passes by and says, "Hey, you should take very fresh black radish. Rub it on cotton, then quickly insert it into the ears." He was advised powders and homeopathy, even before its time.
He was advised to undergo galvanotherapy sessions. This is a technique that involves using a helmet, basically, sending electric current between the two ears.
The treatment might still be too experimental for Beethoven.
He prefers much gentler methods, like spa treatments, which were very popular at the time. He often travels to the Czech Republic, to the city of Carlsbad, now renamed Karlovy Vary.
In the 19th century, all of good European society, notably the Viennese aristocracy, came to be treated in the spa towns of Western Bohemia. In Karlovy Vary, 79 springs gush forth with healing effects. These are hot springs, very rich in mineral salts. I would say it's mainly the iron that you taste. And then, if you look down, you see there is a large limestone deposit, so there is a lot of calcium, giving it a very particular taste. Beethoven came several times to the spa towns because he believed that the miraculous water from the springs of Karlovy Vary could help cure his deafness.
He sometimes takes up to 30 baths in a row, which obviously can relieve him a little in his general health, maybe make his tense muscles relax, but obviously it cannot affect his ear.
None of these numerous treatments prove effective, and in 1820, Beethoven's deafness becomes almost total and irreversible.
It is at this time, by the way, that he started using what are called conversation notebooks, which allowed his interlocutors to write down in these notebooks the questions they wanted to ask Beethoven.
So it's interesting, but we only have an exchange with a single voice, since we mostly see the questions asked to him, and it is very rare for him to respond in writing. He responds orally. But imagine what his daily life was like, and the misunderstandings he could have had with his servants, his friends, and his patrons, simply because half the time he misunderstood what was being said to him.
He is devastated by this infirmity, and it obviously contributes to isolating him. He has cut himself off from the world.
Nearly 2 centuries after his death, the real cause of Beethoven's deafness is still unknown.
The most plausible reason is that Beethoven would have a degenerative disease of the sensory cells of the inner ear, and this disease would probably be of genetic origin.
In 1815, his brother Caspar dies of tuberculosis. It is another tragedy in Beethoven's life, but the composer also sees it as an opportunity to fulfill a dream that had seemed unattainable until then.
His brother has a son named Karl. Beethoven tries by all means to obtain custody of this son.
Tormented by unfulfilled fantasies of fatherhood, he got it into his head to take Karl under his wing and make him somewhat his own creation. But there is the mother who, obviously, does not see it that way. So he files a lawsuit against her, which is absolutely terrible because he goes as far as to disparage the mother.
The argument he gives is that she is not reliable, she has no morals, she had already been in trouble, and he had managed to get her out of prison because she had been involved in some shady financial dealings.
He even calls her the Queen of the Night in reference to Mozart's opera The Magic Flute.
And since he is Beethoven and exists on a social level, he hires many lawyers and ultimately manages to deprive a mother of her child. We must face the facts.
In 1820, after 5 years of legal proceedings, Beethoven finally obtained exclusive custody of his nephew, who was then 14 years old.
And he becomes a substitute father for Karl. Beethoven finds the son he never had. What a dream opportunity. But as Karl grows older, the tensions increase because Beethoven is probably a bit brusque. He doesn't know how to handle parenthood.
After 6 years, the relationship between Beethoven and his nephew only worsens.
He he is often very brutal with him. He goes from loathing to a completely delirious and almost irrational love.
His nephew does not become a musician. He becomes a merchant, and even later a soldier. A tragedy for Beethoven.
Beethoven asks too much of him. He would like him to be another Beethoven, but that's not possible. At one point, Beethoven says, "I've invested so much in this child. I've worked so much for him. I have suffered so much for him." Jucked to realize that he is an ordinary boy.
On August 6, 1826, after a heated argument, Karl, at 20 years old, decides to commit the unforgivable. He goes to Baden, near Vienna, in one of his uncle's favorite walking spots.
In this place, a terrible drama happens. Karl is in the depths of a dreadful depression and makes the tragic decision to kill himself with a pistol. He climbs into these ruins of Rauhenstein. He attempts to shoot himself in the head. The first time, he misses. He reloads his pistol. The second shot, this time, the bullet grazes his temple. He falls unconscious. A carter passing nearby hears the gunshots, rushes over, finds Karl, gives him first aid, and takes him back to the town of Baden, where fortunately, doctors take care of him, and Karl is saved. But this tragedy will cause a real rift, in the sense that there is a failure, obviously, of Karl in his attempt to end his life. But there is also a failure on the part of his uncle Ludwig, his guardian, who understands that he can never be a true substitute father for Karl.
Not only did he shoot in his head, but he shot in Beethoven's heart. That is to say, there are two victims there. But Beethoven will never recover. It's another missed opportunity for him.
This episode is obviously terrible for Beethoven, who realizes at that moment how much of a failure his nephew's upbringing has been.
After his suicide attempt, Karl returns to live with his mother. For Beethoven, it is the abrupt end of this long-hoped-for fatherhood, a new setback from which this time he will never recover.
Beethoven has always been a person with fragile health. Whether it's his intestines, he complains about it a lot.
He slowly destroyed himself with a probably very unbalanced diet. And then because he accompanied his meals with good bottles of Rhine wine, never more than one per meal, he said, but still it starts to add up, plus the beer he drank in the taverns. Anyway, I'm not saying that Beethoven was a drunkard, but he was a good drinker.
He also has headaches, very often, very, very strong headaches. He has rheumatism, he might have had a bit of gout. Obviously, his ears cause him pain from time to time, and then he suffers from lung issues. He's always very worried when he starts coughing, because his mother and brother both died of tuberculosis.
Is his constant anxiety. They even say he examines his spit in his handkerchiefs because he's always afraid of finding blood. He really has this anxiety about his failing body.
In short, he has everything. You could say he's not an imaginary invalid, but a constant one. I've never seen someone who was so sick.
But it is a journey in the middle of winter that will be fatal to him. It is November 18th, 26. Beethoven sets out to visit his brother Nikolai Johann in the north of Austria.
He is calm in the countryside, but very quickly, Beethoven cannot stand the atmosphere of the house. He will return in a cart, a milkman's roofless cart apparently.
He sleeps in a freezing inn. And upon arriving in Vienna, it quickly becomes apparent that he has all the symptoms of what we would call pneumonia today. Week after week, although doctors visit his bedside and apply treatments that are the treatments of the time, unfortunately, his condition worsens more and more.
His hair has turned completely white. He has lost a lot of weight. One of his former students arrives and cries upon seeing him. Seeing this emaciated figure when he once knew a robust man, at least in appearance, was terrible.
In the last days of his life, testimonies show him bedridden and experiencing episodes of coma with brief periods of remission, followed again by relapses with somewhat delirious phenomena, as observed at the time.
After almost 4 months of agony, all hope is lost. A priest administers the last rites to him. Then, in the afternoon of March 26, 1827, his closest friends are at the bedside of the composer, then 56 years old.
The fatal outcome is looming, and in fact, the words he will use just before the end of his agony are commedia finita est. The comedy is over. And a snowstorm breaks out over Vienna, a storm with lightning.
The thunderclaps are there, very loud. There is a terrible lightning strike, and it is said that Beethoven might have had a start. He might have looked at the sky, eyes wide open, and raised his fist one last time. And then he might have collapsed, his eyes closed.
On March 29th, everything is ready to bury Ludwig van Beethoven with dignity.
So, his funeral was truly the funeral of a star.
Beethoven was given a national tribute. It seems that schools were closed. The city stopped to let Beethoven's funeral procession pass.
All of Vienna is in the street. People are crying. We are full of love for this Beethoven who has just left us.
I think that for the people of Vienna, it's worse than the death of the emperor himself. That is to say, it's truly an event, and many are those who flock to the grand mass given in Beethoven's memory. Some authors say there were 10,000, others say up to 25,000 in the streets. In short, an innumerable crowd that is there mourning the deceased master.
The crowd of this impressive procession gathers in front of the Church of the Trinity. It is here that the funeral celebration takes place. Then, the procession continues to the Vienna Central Cemetery.
This is where Beethoven's funeral procession ends. The actor Anschutz delivers the speech written by the great poet Franz Grillparzer, a friend of the composer. The speech praises the creator Beethoven, the way he composes his works, how he develops them. In the second part, it praises the man. And finally, in the conclusion, he delivers an extremely optimistic message, a message of hope for all humanity. He makes the mortals gathered around this grave understand that Beethoven has only died in his earthly body, but that his spirit still lives. And even beyond his spirit, it is his works, his art, that will now flood the entire world and bring hope to all humanity.
In the history of music, there is a before and after Beethoven. He revolutionized the musical language in a masterful way.
Schubert will say, he knows everything, but we do not understand everything he wanted to say. A lot of water will flow in the Danube before what this man created is generally understood.
The one who suffered a lot was Brahms, because after Beethoven's death, the Germans said, The successor is Brahms. So Brahms, what are you waiting for to write symphonies too? He waited more than 40 years because he said he felt Beethoven's breath on his neck. It should be noted that Brahms had a bust of Beethoven hanging above his head, behind him, in his music room in Vienna. So he indeed felt Beethoven's breath. He hesitated all that time before presenting his first symphony. Then he only wrote 4 because Brahms said to himself, "What can one write after Beethoven?"
A myth of music, not only. Ludwig van Beethoven also becomes an icon in the art world. The most famous example is certainly preserved in Vienna, in the Secession Building, the exhibition venue for one of the most important Viennese art movements of the early 20th century. In this room, a majestic frieze dominates. It was painted in 1902 by the great Gustav Klimt.
Gustav Klimt created this frieze in honor of Beethoven and his Ninth Symphony. And by the way, we see the last scene, the women's choir singing the Ode to Joy. This choir surrounds a couple kissing, and there, the kiss of this couple is a kiss to the whole world, the fraternal kiss. The artists of the Secession appropriated the figure of Beethoven, who was considered a wind of freedom, creative and revolutionary. So, one must imagine that in the Secession Building, in 1902, there were about 20 artists who gathered to pay tribute to Beethoven. In the main hall, there was the frieze, the Klimt, and the immense sculpture of Beethoven created by Max Klinger. Whether you are a painter, sculptor, architect, or musician, Beethoven is more relevant than ever for all the artists of the Secession.
Throughout the 20th century, some of Beethoven's works even gained significant political resonance. While the Ninth Symphony is now the European anthem, the beginning of the Fifth was used in resistance messages during the Second World War.
The resistance fighters noticed that the V for victory in Morse code had 3 shorts and 1 long. Ta, 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 ta. It was associated with the beginning of the Fifth Symphony, so much so that this Fifth Symphony is used by the resistance as a rallying sign.
In 1977, NASA launched 2 space probes into space. On board, a golden record intended for other possible civilizations. It contains 115 images, several sounds of nature, messages in different languages, and especially 27 music excerpts, including 2 by Beethoven.
And the Americans put a recording of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, thinking that it would be a good signal for the aliens to understand humanity. What more can be said?
On Earth, the master's manuscripts are still highly sought after in auction rooms today. In 2003, for example, this score of the Ninth Symphony sold for nearly 3 million euros, a true record for a Beethoven document. If Beethoven's works fascinate, they also influence the work of today's musicians, like the Pope of electronic music, Jean-Michel Jarre.
One of the reasons why Beethoven has always certainly been one of my greatest sources of inspiration is because Beethoven has a very visionary side, meaning he is a musician of the future, paradoxically. He is someone who will not stop exploring and pushing the orchestra to its limits, and he focuses very, very early on all the problems of the orchestra's sound and not just the notes. Beethoven will be the first composer who will, in a way, escape from the score, but simply think, conceive music in another way, in a sonic way, and by taking the orchestra as an almost living creature, and not just as a group of musicians in a rather dogmatic way. And so, music will never be the same after. That's why people as different as Miles Davis or John Coltrane in jazz, or whether it's the Beatles or any rock or even punk band, refer to Beethoven because of that. After Beethoven, music truly enters its modern era.